Scene one, Apple, take one.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Film Notes. I'm Shane Borza. I'm here to interview people, talk about their work in the industry, and get their notes on what they've learned and how they are doing what it is that they're doing. So today I have a new connection, Deborah Correa, who is a LA-based filmmaker, and she has a new film called The War Between, which I just found out was just premiered in LA. So I'm super psyched to talk about that, but also your career and how you ended up becoming a director of a feature. So welcome, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Shane. Yeah, this is great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So yes, the War Between is my first feature film. I had done a couple short films prior to. I studied film at Emerson College, and then I took part in the directing workshop for women at AFI. So I had a couple shorts under my belt, and I had also focused on documentary film and documentary television. So I was doing freelance at the same time with documentary work, features and TV. Also podcasts. I worked on Spotify's Son of a Hitman, which was really fun. So this has been my dream since I was probably 11 years old, to direct a feature film. And for a long time, I was just not sure if it would ever happen or if I was good enough to do it. And I lacked that confidence to believe in myself from the get-go. It's something that I feel like grew with me as I experienced more and more telling stories through different mediums and medias and with different people. And the more time and exposure I had on set and doing the shorts and just collaborating with writers and working on the production end, I started to realize, like, no, I can definitely do this. And so it was through a writer collaborator friend that this feature transpired. Ron Youngle wrote The War Between. He was actually working with my sister, and she did the intro, and he retired to focus solely on screenwriting. So it was like he retired from his day job, and now he's focused on his dream. And we've made this first film. He has a couple other ones lined up. This was the one that we knew we could do with a lower budget, something that was manageable, and we would shoot it entirely on location. And I knew it would be a challenge, but I also knew that it could be done. So it was like that perfect balance of, like, I know enough skill, I have enough skill set in myself, and I can build my confidence to do it, but I know that we can actually tell this story. And I was excited to do it too, because it's based on the most Western battle of the Civil War that actually happened at Picacho Peak, and we got to shoot where the battle actually took place. So all of that lined up, and I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Plus, it's a Civil War story couched in a Western. So and a survival story between two enemies. So I was like, yes, this is great. And so he had pitched the story to me, and he had it percolating over, like, I want to say over a decade. And it was from watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There's like a section where they talk about the Arizona Territory. And he thought that was just dramatized and made up, but it wasn't. He did research. And he was like, oh my gosh, there was the Battle of Glorieta Pass in the New Mexico Territory, and then the Battle of Picacho Peak, which was a very small scale battle. But it was like two patrol teams. And there's still, like, I did research on it, and like I think it was actually an ambush. But we did research on that, and found out a lot about it and realized that we could shoot on location. And so it kind of just evolved from that. It was a passion behind that, the conviction behind that, and it felt very timely at the same time.
You said a lot in there that I want to dive into, but to start a little bit with kind of the history again, you mentioned, like, at 11, like, knowing, like, oh, I want to, like, direct a film. And I'm curious, like, where did that come from? Because especially, like, knowing, I think most people when they're kids, they picture more of, like, being in a movie, not being the one who makes the movie. Not even maybe even understanding, even some adults, like, no, there's different roles behind the camera that do different things to make the stuff that you watch. So where did that come from? How did you end up having that spark so early?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I remember, like, being very little and watching The Mission. I think my parents thought, I don't know what they thought it was, but like I remember watching The Mission and being like blown away by it. I was probably 6 or 5 or something, but very kind of upset by it because it felt so real. And that's always stayed with me. And then as we as we grew up, my parents moved around a lot. My dad's from South America, so we lived in Medellin, Colombia for a few years. And it was like the height of like the Pablo Escobar narco terrorism. So there's car bombs and kidnappings and all kinds of danger around. And we stayed very insular during that time. We would still live our lives, but we were very insular because we also look very American, even though we're half Colombian. And so it's like they can spot, you get spotted really quickly. So we dove into reading books. It was like our haven, our safe haven. We were very young, and I have 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers, so I was in the middle. And my older sister, she was very much into literature. She ended up becoming a literature major, and she has a couple master's degrees, and she teaches English in Colombia now. But we had started writing our own stories and like being very inspired by the Bronte sisters. And so we started to develop these stories that felt like films. And she was like, maybe you are meant to be a director. Because it was like I would visualize the story in my head so clearly, and then we would map it out. And we started telling our own stories, but it was also like visualizing what we were reading. And it kind of just blossomed from there. And it stuck with me. I remember the moment I was like, oh, this is right. It stuck with me. And so ever since then, it was like that has been my trajectory and my dream. And so I focused on going to film school and learning as much as I could for directing. But throughout that period of time, your dream kind of takes a hit. You get kind of jaded, you think maybe it's like won't ever happen, and it's only for the very special people who know exactly what they're doing and are very talented. And so it was like a learning process and a journey of just re-accepting myself and embracing that childhood dream. But that's where it came from. It really came from like deep story time during a very dangerous, violent period of our lives.
And that's one of the things that I think is so great, is the through line of people that I've had on the show over the years, is that regardless of what kind of story or where it comes from, like they're just the power of storytelling. You mentioned documentary, those are like real stories or it's fiction or whatever genre it is. It's like these compelling stories that stick with us or teach us lessons or give us examples, or it's something we retreat back to, even like, a favorite book, we'll rewatch the same movie over, like we already know, but there's something about like getting into that story or knowing that story is there, especially now when we're recording this, it's the holiday season. Like we're going to rewatch all the Christmas movies that we watch every year. Like there's something, the power of the cinema. So I'm so glad that you had that instilled so early and you were able to, it sounds like, use that to keep you going. Now you mentioned you went to film school, but then you went to AFI afterwards. So what was that kind of period? Because it's kind of like, so like go to film school and then almost like go to a master's degree program, sort of, as far as your college career goes. Is that kind of how that went? Or when you got done?
That's a good point. Yeah, it kind of was. The workshop is a very intensive, like month-long workshop. And then you do a short film from like soup to nuts, finish it, and get distribution for it. But it was like that felt very intensive. And so I think like it was interesting because when I was at Emerson, I went to Emerson for directing narrative. That was my goal. But as I was there, I realized how much I love documentary. And so I ended up doing a short documentary and it landed at PBS. And so I started working for PBS right after Emerson College. And in my mind, I guess like I'd gone through a period where I was like, I have to choose. Like I need to choose one path, documentary or scripted narrative. But that's like not true. You don't have to choose because one informs the other. And as I went through, I worked with Austin Hoyt on American Experience docs, and he was amazing to work with, amazing storyteller, very talented storyteller. But I wanted to pursue narrative, so I moved to LA, and that's when I got into the AFI program. And I realized like all of that background work in documentary kind of led me to this path, which is like more historical drama, because it wasn't picking one or the other. It was kind of it's still storytelling within like the doc world. You still have to be, it has to be strong story, strong character development and arcs. And so, and I also am an archival producer. And actually, that's what I started out doing with Austin. It was archival research. And that has really informed me moving forward, especially with The War Between, because we wanted a certain amount of accuracy, and then also stylistically, there's a little bit of a docu vibe that's infused with it too. So maybe it felt like I was like straying off the path, but I wasn't. It was just informing me more towards narrative and the kind of stories I wanted to tell as a director, because it took me time to figure out what that was. It was mostly like a contrast of like, you try stuff and then you don't love it, or it's not as interesting as you thought. Like I like at AFI I did a short rom-com and it was fun, but I realized I wasn't like passionate about that genre or really cared. I was just trying to showcase like, look, I can do this. I can do something kind of commercial, but I realized I'm more drawn towards like true stories, real world stories, historical stories, military stories, like that kind of thing.
As we were talking before we hit record, there's no like one way in the industry. And so it's always interesting to me to hear some of the backstory to see like, and this kind of echoes what I was taught in film school about script structure, where the script has to be written in such a way that the audience is constantly asking themselves kind of like, what's going to happen next? And it feels kind of like, I have no idea what's going to happen. But if you kind of play it backwards, it should read like, well, this is the only way this story could have happened. Like if you put the scenes in the reverse order. And similarly, I think people's careers are kind of like that too, where you start and you're kind of like, I want to do this, and then you try it and you're like, I don't want to do that, or like, I want to go this way and work with these people doing this stuff, and then you're like, I hate these people, and what am I going to do? Or I did this job because someone would hire me, and it's like, oh, I love this, and it feels like a lot of random accidents and chance and happenstance and all these things, but these are all like strands that weave together and then help us later when we're like, oh, I'm doing this, based on true story, historical fiction, military type of thing. It's based on all these things that went, of course I'm here, so just hearing both the little bit you told before we started rolling and the little bit now, I'm like, of course, this is the only movie you could have done right now. So
I love that, Shane. That really resonates with me, because it's like, that is true. It's like, I love that parallel, because when you look at a story backwards, you're like, oh, of course it has to be told that way. And there's so many times in my life where I felt so like, what am I doing? Or why did this happen? Or why is this taking so long? So and it's true. It's like all of it leads towards something very powerful. It's almost like you have to trust the process, even when it feels off. Because the contrast of not liking something is just as powerful. So learning that you don't like something can be just as powerful as something that you do like, because it like sharpens your focus.
Well, you mentioned timeline there. So let me ask you, you mentioned film school and then AFI and then this, like, what's the timeline here? Is this like a couple of years? Is this like a decade or something? Like, when did you go to school and then AFI and then have this happen? Because you mentioned there was a documentary period in the middle. So I'm just curious, like, where you were when you went from A to B to C, so to speak.
Yeah, so it was like Emerson was college, and right after college, I did my work with Austin Hoyt, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and it was like I had gotten a creative development job at Disney, but it was like this little studio right when Hulu was starting to pick up. It was like starting to grow, but it was like I worked at that for a few months, and then I got into the AFI program, and I had applied to it thinking like, oh, I probably won't get in, but I got in and I was shocked. I was like, oh my God. And it was that, so it was right after moving here, I got into the AFI program. I did the short film. I actually got distribution for that little film. But it was like a very down period. It was like 2010, 11. Like it was, I remember it being like a very like not great time to look for work. And I could not find a job after AFI. It was like temping, and I was in a long distance relationship with my now husband. So it was like he was in Boston, I was in LA. And I just remember being like, this is not working. And so I went back to Boston, and then we ended up moving to New York. And it was like I had to try. I felt like it wasn't meant for me. I was like, okay, I tried it. It's not working. I need to go back to documentary or just do something different. And I kind of walked away from everything for like a period of, I want to say like 2 or 3 years, where I went into advertising. I tried that, hated it. went to New York, didn't like New York. It was like trying stuff that I didn't like, but then being like, so what is it? And I got called back to LA. It was like a friend called me and was like, help me finish my short film. And it brought me back. And then when it brought, that felt very destined, like I had a feeling of destiny when that happened. I was like, I didn't really believe in that. And now I'm like, well, I stayed because then I ended up getting a job that was a History Channel show right after that, and then another job. And so it kept building after that. So my documentary period came back where I was like working on this really cool docuseries called Live to Tell. And then it was The Warfighters, which was working with Spec Ops veterans on 12 episodes of Rangers and SEALs and, the global war on terror, their stories. And it was a mixture of sit-down interviews, archival, which I was doing, and then the cinematic recreations, which we shot with the actual like retired former SEALs and Rangers. So it was a really cool experience with Peter Berg's company, Film 45. That went on for like a year and a half. And then I started working, I think I worked at Brave New Films after that with Robert Greenwald. So it was like, it kind of like it was documentary, was building. Within that time frame, I was also working on a couple shorts. Like I had done a short film called Recollection, and I actually worked with Josh Kelly, who's an Army Ranger. I met him through the show. He's an Army Ranger veteran and an actor, great actor. So it was like I was still continuing, but I just wasn't like, in my mind, I was like, at some point I'll do a feature, but who knows when or how. And that period of time was very rich. Like, I just remember thinking, like, especially on that History Channel show, I was like, I love this time in my life. I remember being like, I love this because it's a perfect mixture of narrative with the recreation and archival documentary with the sit-down interviews and all the archival research I was doing. And I loved it. It was a perfect mix of that. And that was like, it was kind of showing me more as like, okay, yeah, I like this. This is what I love. And it just kind of built from there. And so that was like probably over the course of like, I don't know, like that was 8 years ago, something like that. I think that show came out in 2016 or 2017. And so it's been like freelance documentary work, working with Robert at Brave New Films. And then this opportunity came through Ron, who wrote it, where he had seen my short films. And we had become friends at that point, and then we were discussing. He also has another amazing script that we're developing right now. It's finished, but he's still doing he just got a couple accolades on it with the ISA semifinalist and then an Austin Film Festival second rounder. And we're doing and that one is another historical drama. So it's a World War II story, and it's about the German prisoner of war camps in the middle of Colorado. And they were Camp Trinidad was right next to Camp Amachi, which was the Japanese-American internment camp. So this is a historically accurate space and time. And it's a love story that we tell between Betty, who's one of the Japanese-American internees, and then Ulrich, who's one of the German prisoners of war. And within the prisoner of war camp, there were the hardcore Nazis who were kind of like the hierarchy of the camp. And the Americans would kind of turn a blind eye to it. So there was like weird stuff going on. But the thing is, a lot of those German prisoners of war, they never left. They stayed here in this country. And so it's kind of like taking that slice of history that's nobody really talks about or even knows about, and shedding the light on it, and especially the trauma and the devastation that happened with the Japanese American families who lost their homes and their businesses. Anyway, that was like a huge, I knew that's a huge undertaking. And so that's our next one. But I was like, Ron, we can't start with this one. But he was like, well, I have another one. And then that's how the War Between started coming into discussion.
Well, I was just looking up because when you were telling that story about the next project with the people at the two different camps, it reminded me, and I was like, I can't remember who said this. And it's a Harry S. Truman quote, which is, the only new thing is the history you don't yet know. And there's all these things that people are like, I never knew that. That's amazing. Or, say based on a true story. And they're like, what? And those are the greatest stories for me, where you're kind of like, I was a big fan of the comedian Sam Kinison. And he used to say that, truth is the best comedy because you can't make things up.
Yes.
It seems so outrageous and impossible, but he's like, that's where the best stuff comes from, is like your real life. And you go, no shit, this happened to me. let's make a joke out of it. And people go, I can't believe that. And you're like, but it's true, you know? So all I could think of when you're saying this story is you're like, wait, what? Colorado? What? They're still, you know? So it just pulls you in. And the film that you made too, the same thing, you know, I mean, I was reading up on the website, like the director's statement, the executive summary, and some of that stuff. And you're like, I never knew any of that, you know, like, I have a master's degree and went to high school and college history classes. And it's like whenever you hear about the Civil War, it's all the East Coast.
Yes, in the South, yeah.
And it's the famous battles of, you know, here, and here. And those are kind of the high points that stick out. And if you go even to the central states, you're kind of like, you don't even really hear about that, much less any further west. So
right, exactly.
The fact that you were able to kind of blend in like this, you know, fictional narrative, you know, based on real events and shoot at the real place, like that's amazing. So let's shift into that film, because I wanted to ask you some things about that. First of all, the premise, you talked a little bit about it, but it's about a couple different characters from like different worlds, so to speak, that all kind of crash into each other. So which reminded me, it's a little bit on the other hand too, because so you have which most Westerns, you know, you have whether it's like cowboys and Indians, or, you know, the black hat versus the white hat. It's like these opposing people, but you two are coming into like a traditional, like most Westerns, it's like you think of Sam Peckinpah and people like that. So how was it for you to come in as not only a young director, but a young woman into that genre and be like, oh, like I'm totally going to own this and do this story, and have it be about, you know, there's a Native American character, there's like a Confederate character, there's a, you know, Northern character, and having those different worlds, as well as you being kind of in that world and telling maybe that story in a different way? Or was it just like, hey, I'm going to just tell a Western because it's a Western, it doesn't matter who I am? Like, what did you bring into that? Or did you find anything just in that dichotomy?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Like, yeah, well, I grew up watching Westerns first. Like, I love Westerns. And John Ford, like The Searchers, like I love Westerns. My grandfather was a huge influence in my life, and he loved Westerns too. He was a World War II veteran. And so I would watch them with him. And I think like I came at it from this perspective of like the Westerns within, like, it is a very American genre. And within this like stage that, you know, this movie, like we can tell big epic stories. And I approached it in that regard, where I was like, I see this film, like there's this micro tension and fight between these two characters, but then we have them also surviving within nature. So it was like man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself. That was the feeling I had from it. And then as I came into it, I was like, I'm a mom. So when I watch something, or when I create something, or when I approach something, it's almost like I see the little boy, the child within those characters. And I feel like that's kind of how I approach set life too, where it's like I feel more like the mom on set, right? Taking care of like everybody who's working on it. And I think that is really what my perspective, what the kind of perspective I brought to it when I was directing it, when I was prepping it, and then how I handled myself on set and with the crew and with the cast. I get really bored and tired of the binary stuff, good and bad, black and white, like Native American versus settler. So I don't feel like that's true to life. I think that's a very like simplistic take on our experience as human beings in this world. And so I like to play against that genre type, and I like to play against those opposing forces to show more nuance and complexity within each human being. And I think the biggest thing with The War Between and with the script and what I wanted to explore was like, what is it about certain people, or what is it about us where we can like dehumanize certain people but not others? What does that mean? Like, why does that happen? So you see it happening within the two characters, and you're like, wait, why do they think that way about that person and that way about the other person? And it's like when it comes down to it, it's like they just don't know them as human beings yet. They just don't know them. Like they don't get to know them. And so that was like my intrigue and interest in the story and what I wanted to explore within like the Western genre, because I feel like Westerns can get really oversimplified really easy, and they also can become just shootout stories. So the whole thing is just conflict and like there's no point. And so I really wanted to bring more like of a nuance to it where it felt more like a human story, like a real story, not just a fairy tale or a narrative from the past that we're just retelling with a modern lens.
Sorry to stop the show, but we've got some bills to pay around here, and to do that, I wanted to point out a couple things I've got on offer at shaneborza.com. As both a master level mental health coach and an award-winning filmmaker, I have the experience and expertise to help you go further faster, regardless of whether that is in your production or life. I am psyched to announce all my courses and books have been updated and expanded and are available on both Apple Books and at my shop. Especially wanted to point out my Film Notes book and workbook, where you can learn everything you need to make your film and get it out to the world. If you need help with either your life or film, please reach out. And now, back to the show. You mentioned being able to tell this like within the budget, and one of the difficulties of indie film, of course, is, especially if you're doing like a period piece, is like making it look right and having, you also just shooting in the location, if you're remote or whatever. So how did you get that aspect of it so that you were able to have it like look the way you want and like feel genuine, and especially to, if you're making any film, people have to get into the character, but if you're making a film that's set, like 100 years in the past, sometimes there's a lot of there too, where people are like, no, you have to really translate like the way they talk even, or the thoughts of that generation, not the generation you're from or having, that takes a lot of time. And of course, time is money in a film. So how did you wrangle all of that, of not only the budgetary concern of making sure you had all the things, because even with prop weapons and everything, they have to look right, but also dealing with shooting like out in the desert like that, you have to bring everything with you. So that, especially for kind of an indie film, I'd like hats off to you for doing that, because most people, we're doing like 2 people in a room. God, I can afford that. Yay, So I'm very interested to know how that all went about, because it's great when you have a great script and it's great when you have great actors, but you need to have all that, behind the scenes stuff too. Yeah. So how did that all come together for you?
Yeah, that is a good question, because it was like we really had a really small budget for this one, and I knew, like, I guess it's a twofold question, right? Because when it comes to the actual production of it, I have a lot of anxiety about making sure everything is authentically accurate in terms of the way they spoke and the way they looked and everything, right? And there was a couple mistakes that I couldn't, like, we had to roll with it. A couple little like things here and there, but we had a really strong armor, a really strong costume designer, and a really strong production designer, and we all knew, and a really good makeup team with like keeping the wounds consistent. And we all were like on the same page with the authenticity aspect of it, and they worked really hard. We only had like, I think it was like a month and a half of prep, of pre-production. And our armor actually his name is Amos Carver, and he's worked on a lot of films, and he actually had guns that were used in the Civil War. So like the rifle that Sam Bullington, who plays Moses, like that rifle actually was used in the Civil War. So we lucked out with him. And we started out with a very strong line producer named Lenny Messi, who was based in Tucson, Arizona, with Monsoon Production Services. Ron had a friend who connected us with people in Arizona. And so we knew we wanted to shoot on location. So we wanted all local crew and a lot of local cast as well. And we were the first film that qualified for the new Arizona tax incentive for shooting there. And so we wanted to adhere to those rules and also work within like the local community there with everything. And so it was kind of like relying on those departments and trusting that they were going to like get it done right. And they did an amazing job. So that was like that's like the main thing, right? You do your research, but there's only so far it can go, because then you have to just like trust your crew. So I feel like the film is as strong as the crew. And Ron, when he wrote it, he had done like copious amounts of research with personal memoir and letters from those times. So like the Union volunteer force that our main character, Israel, Damien Conrad Davis plays Israel, they're based off those like real letters. And the same with the Confederate soldier. It's like they spoke with this eloquent, kind of fancy sounding language, even though they didn't always like read or write very well. So we did adhere, like we kept very close to that. And it was hard for me at first to be like, oh God, you know, are the actors gonna be able to talk this way and not take the audience out of it? And I feel like that was a worry I had. But then as we were on set and we were going through it and rehearsing a bit, I was like, oh no, they got this. They had those two actors had done an amazing job of building their own backstories, their own motivations for who the character was and why they were there. And it was so great to see that and work with them, because I was like, I didn't really have to do anything. I was just there. I was like, okay, we're, you know, all of this setup, all of these, you know, they knew their lines, they had their motivations. It was almost like it was just the blocking and the visual execution of it. And I didn't have to really worry about them. I was really impressed with both of them. And Damien's character is based on the California volunteer force called the California Column. And I had never heard about them, but they were a Union volunteer force that forced the Confederacy out of Southern California, because at that point in time, the Confederacy had tried to bring slavery to Los Angeles. They were trying to bring slavery into Southern California and the Arizona Territory. And so the California Column pushed them out. And so we were showing like, it was a volunteer force because they were so convicted against slavery. So they pushed them out of Southern California and the Arizona Territory, but a lot of the Union soldiers were also committing genocide against the Native American populations. And so we wanted to explore that part of history that people don't like to talk about it or even think about it, because they're like, oh, but they're the good guys. Why would they do this if they were fighting slavery? So it's like, that's the thing that I wanted to explore with, like, what makes us choose who is more human than the other. And I feel like too, with the production part of it, that's like a whole other deep conversation I did with my cinematographer. So we can go into more of like the film notes aspect of the shoot, because that was a very rigorous prep we did for the shoot days.
A couple things. First, again, like you're telling all this stuff that I'm like, oh, I never knew about that California thing, and then trying to go in and then pushing them out. Like, so it goes back to that quote I mentioned earlier. It's like, oh, fascinated to learn like new history I didn't know that was there, or that these stories are based on like real things that really happened. Like, what a great way to have a film or a story, like, you know, I'm sure it'll connect with people who will probably go and be like, I want to learn more about this, you know, and it can educate people and entertain people and teach people and all this stuff all together. So I'm really glad that that all came. And, you know, shout out to the crews and all the people, because you're right. Like, we need great heads of department. We need great people to do great work. Otherwise, you know, you can't have a great film and be like, well, everything was great except for the sound, or everything was great except for the lead, or everything, you know, then it's not going to work. You have to have all those ingredients come together. But I wanted to ask, especially when you're talking about like Native Americans, did you have any like consultants or people you were working with to like learn about all these things? You know, like you mentioned, it's learning how people talked and learning, you know, what was accurate or what have you. And what was that experience like?
Yeah, I took that very seriously, because I feel like a lot of times we pull from what we've seen or what's already been done. And so I wanted to find an Apache consultant to help us with our Apache character and to give us guidance on story, plot, and language, and also like the authenticity of what they wore and how they would conduct themselves. And then I also wanted to find a Navajo consultant for the Navajo scenes. We have a whole couple scenes at the end with the Navajo warrior tribe. Navajo warriors and a female leader. It's a very important scene. It was a very important scene to me, and so I wanted to get it right. And luckily enough, our boom op, his name is Luke Hunt. He lives on the reservation. He's Navajo, and he offered. And I was like, "Are you serious?" Yes. We need to find proper costuming, the actors, exactly how they would have done the ceremony, what the prayer would have been like. And so he helped with all of that. And I was so grateful to Luke. And then I had to really dive deep and find an Apache consultant for the Apache character. And it took me I was really focused on that because I wanted it to be right. I wanted him to approve the storyline and the character. And so I found Larold Pinal, who is a White Mountain Apache medicine man. And he helped us with the language because Wayne Charles Baker, he is Salish. He's from the Squamish tribe in Eastern Canada. And he had to learn Apache for some of the prayer and some of the lines. And then we wanted to make sure the costuming was right. The names were right. The nicknames he would have given the characters and himself were right. Everything was passed through Larold. And so we would have long Zooms with him to make sure we were getting it right. So I was because I wanted to make sure we weren't perpetuating stereotypes and narratives just from stuff that we had seen, or even sometimes your own research isn't good enough. You really have to work with the people and collaborate with them to have that authenticity. So that was a big focus of mine right before we were shooting. And then throughout the shoot, Larold was amazing. And he worked with Wayne on the language. And Apache was hard. It's hard to learn. But Wayne did great.
Well, I'm so glad you found those people, and yeah, special shout out to Luke. That sounds, and these are the happy accidents where you meet the right people and they can unlock something that you're like, oh, this never would have happened if so and so didn't happen to be part of the crew or what have you, and
yeah,
really change where the production goes. So I'm so glad that happened. Now you started to talk about some notes earlier. So what might be some notes either from this film or just your career in general that might be kind of good lessons learned or things you would recommend people do or don't do?
Okay, so for the film notes for production, I would like to address the shooting out in the wide open spaces because it was a lot more challenging than I thought. At first, when you think about it, you watch films, you see the world that they've created and the frames they chose and how they did it, and in the back of your mind, you think it's easier than you think it's easy because it looks easy, but then you're out there and it's you have to harness all this space within the four, the frame of the camera. So prior to our shoot, Evan and I did a camera test to figure out what lenses we wanted. And Evan Jake Cohen is my cinematographer. I met him at Emerson College. And so he's been my cinematographer throughout everything, all my shorts, and the war between. And so we knew we wanted anamorphic lenses, and he had these vintage Russian Lomo lenses that were amazing. It looks like a painting when you see the execution of it, especially at magic hour. So we went with those, and we knew we were going to go with this more romantic filmic cinematic look. I learned a lot from Evan on this film because we only had a week to prep to do pre-visualization. Of course, we'd already shot listed and storyboarded the harder scenes, like the battle flashbacks and a couple of the more actiony encounters. But he was like, we wanted to have boots on the ground at every location. We wanted to know what our setups were going to be. And so we took 2 PAs with us. It was Robert and Roberto. And they were the stand-ins for the actors. And so what we did was we used Artemis and we photoboarded as much of the script as we could within the locations where we knew we were going to shoot. So I think we had 5 locations in 15 days. And I had these pink surveyor flags that I marked out the geography of what we were going to shoot. So we had, this is going to be the setup, the scene number and the setup. And we knew our framing and our lenses from that. And it was the scenes that we hadn't done that in took way longer. So I realized that pre-visualization prep that we did saved us a ton of time. So we were able to shoot the entire film in 15 days.
That's remarkable. But one of the things I learned in film school from the producing teacher, and I say this almost every interview because somebody brings it up, is if you kill yourself from pre-production, your production will be easy. So the more prep you can do, the more organized you can be, even if things don't go to plan, because you can be flexible. But
yes.
If you're I want to do this and it doesn't work, and then you're stuck. But the more, so I'm so glad you got a chance to go out there and yeah, stand-ins, a lot of people, I think, they learn from examples. So when people hear stories about like, oh, well, we did this and this problem came and then we solved it this way, they're like, oh, I never would have thought of that. So what a great way. And I love the surveyor flags idea. Like I haven't heard anybody talk about that, but yeah, obviously you need to come back out and be like, where were we last time? A month ago,
Yeah.
a week ago, oh, there's the flags. Great. What a great note. So other than the film, is there anything, because we talked a lot about the different work you've done over your career, the different kinds of projects, shorts and feature. Is there any other like notes you would have for people who want to get in the industry or maybe do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, there's like the logistical, practical advice, but then there's also like, I wish I had been more kind to myself throughout the years. Because I was so hard on myself from the very beginning. Like, you have to do this. This has to happen now. Like a very strict idea of timeline. And life is not like that. And so I wish I had been more kind to, even now, it's like all of those fears and doubts come up. But I think it's like when you're kind to yourself and you give yourself that space and knowing that, like, it's almost like reparenting yourself. You extend that to other people. And I think that is a really important thing that I've learned. It's like a self-compassion that comes out towards how you treat other people because you feel safe with yourself. And I think that's like the biggest thing, because so much dysfunction and pain comes from fear, and the fear that you're not going to get a chance, or the fear that you're not good enough. So I feel like those things, it's good to be aware if that's what's happening in your head. And for me, I wish that I had, and even now, it's like, I need to take my own advice, but it's like giving yourself a pat on the back when you do it right, or when you do it well, or when you like are consistent and you see it through. And so I think that's the number one thing. And it's also consistency. It's like not looking for external validation when you feel like you really need it, or you think like, I need this person to think I'm good for me to be successful, or I think I need this person to help me be successful. Or I think that all of that is like, I think the success comes from inside of you. It's like you as a person, it's like, there's not one person who's going to be the reason I'm successful or not. It's up to me. And it's being consistent with the work and not needing external validation. All very hard things as a human being. But I think it's mostly like, that's my advice for like the mindfulness self-care aspect. And then I think like logistics, it's just like, don't give up, and really have, I think, authentic networking with people that you like. It's like, if you're not a match with somebody, that's fine. You find the person that you are a match with to work with. Like you don't have to try to make something work with somebody just because you think that they're the only ones out there. And I think it's having like flexibility with people and yourself. And film is the most collaborative art form. Like it really truly is a collaboration. And I have learned so much from this film, from all of the people, the crew that I worked with, the actors that I worked with. They were extremely helpful in showing me like how I can step up and be stronger as a director, and just be confident in my choices and my perspective, or my POV of how I see the story. And then having a great working relationship with my cinematographer, with Evan, and learning, because he works continuously on commercials and behind the scenes stuff and other films. And I learned so much from his process. So I think it's like learning from the people that you work with, and staying humble, and kind of like that thing that they say where it's like, it's almost like you're learning as if you don't know yet, like a fresh take on it. That's my main stuff. I think about that stuff a lot.
So much good stuff in there. I just want to echo at the end when you're talking about the collaboration. Well, first, it's great that you met somebody, and it's kind of the classic, like, oh, we met in film school, but it's true. Sometimes you connect with someone and then you get along like a house on fire, and you just like, help each other be better, or learn from each other. And it's a good meshing. So that's always great. But also, I mean, all the stuff you said at the beginning. So for people who don't know or don't remember, so I have I'm a mental health coach. So that's like my day job. And a lot of what you said about like taking care of yourself, or like even noticing like, oh, I'm in this, here it is again in my head, what have you. We really do have to redefine what success is sometimes. And just say, hey, maybe when I was younger, or when I didn't know better, success was A, but maybe it can be B now. I had to allow that to shift. But the other big thing you brought up, and this is of course the hardest thing, and especially the longer things go, is like just keeping moving forward, or completing things. And
Yeah.
films, like you mentioned, it's so collaborative. So even when we finish, it's like we're wrapped. Okay, now we get to start the next 6 months worth of stuff that we have to do. It's so long to do all this stuff. So anytime anyone comes here and they're like, I just finished a film, I'm like, God bless you. Like, that is so much work. Good job. I can't wait to see it. Like, where can people see it? So let's have you talk a little bit about that. And you mentioned the beginning that you just said the premiere. So I'd love to hear how that went. And then where can people find it?
Yeah. And Shane, like, I have to address that too, because like I did not think that we shot the film in April of 2023 in 15 days. Then it's been a post process of what, 2.5 years? Like, it's been a way longer than I thought it would take to get it out. And it had to go through a couple iterations. Like, we reworked it and had to do this. And it's almost like, because I don't have, well, I don't have it yet. I don't have like all the resources I would love to have yet. Right. But I do have my team and the people around me to help me finish this film. And it needed a lot of massaging, I would say. Like, we shot really fast. We had a lot of creative choices we had to make in post. And we had premiered the film at the Phoenix Film Festival in 2024. It was like April the next year in 2024. But it wasn't done. It wasn't fully done. And I don't recommend that. But it became like, we sold out. The audience loved it. But it became like our test screening where we knew what we needed to change. So we ended up having like a process where I worked, actually the actors helped me a lot with this too, and my editors. But it was like a process where we cut like 20 minutes out of the film. We restructured the beginning and did a complete legit sound pass and sound design mix with Juniper Post. David Kitchens was amazing. So it was like we had this whole like multi-step process to actually get it finished. So it wasn't even finished until February of this year. Like finished. So then we had like kind of a second premiere at Beloit Film Festival. And then after that, we got into like several more film festivals. So we screened at Tallgrass and St. Louis and Coronado. But it was like a really painful, like pulling teeth process in these past 2 years. And I've had to really watch myself and like not go dark and down, because you think like, okay, you did pre-production. Yay, good for you. You found your cast. Yay, good for you. You shot your film. Yay, good for you. Then you're in post and it's like a whole other battle. And now we're in like finishing our distribution phase. That was a whole other battle. Festivals, a whole other. So it's almost like you have to prepare your mind and you have to prepare yourself for each facet of what this is going to be, because it's an independent film, and it's the independent film world right now is like in shambles. It's almost like a perfect time for independent film to rise, because we're in like, I feel like we're in the dark ages of cinema. It's like we're going like kind of backwards to how it started, and like it's going to come back out. So I feel like it could be a flourishing time for independent film. And it's like getting yourself in that strong frame of mind to know that you have like a couple more battles to go, but you'll make it. I just didn't know. I didn't know until we were going through it. And I just told Evan, actually, I was just talking to him, and I was like, I feel like I've been released and I'm out of prison now or something. Like I'm like free because the film is done and it's like out. Because it's been such a long, hard journey, but it's definitely worth it. 100% worth it. And our film now, we found distribution through Tricoast, and we are on Amazon and Fandango. And then I think in the next week we'll be on Apple and a couple of other more of the streaming platforms.
And I know that you have the website, I think it's theWarBetweenFilm.com. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
But where can people either follow the film, maybe on socials, or follow you, or like, do you have a website? Where can they learn more about you and maybe your other work, or even what you've got coming up next?
Yeah, I'm almost like, I'm actually looking at my past of my website. It's not up yet, but my Instagram is Deb Directs, and the War Between Instagram is the War Between Film. So those two, I keep the War Between Film up to date with all the premieres and our events little fun things here and there, and the info on the film and the actors is there. Because Damien, Sam, Issa, Wayne, they all have their Instagram pages too, and you can find them through the War Between Film.
Well, thanks again for being here. I'm so glad we got a chance not only to meet, but also talk about your film. And I really encourage everybody, whenever they hear about these films on the show, to go seek them out. So please follow Deborah on the socials and follow the film, and then look it up on Amazon and Apple and all the places. So for those of you who are new here, this is a YouTube show, and we're talking about film that you watch. So I always encourage people, like, go watch the show so you can see the person who's talking. You can see the posters. Sometimes we put trailers in the show. It's great to listen to podcasts because they're easy, but I always encourage people, watch the show. And we're here every month. So tune in next time and you'll hear another great story like Deborah's today. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much, Shane. That was so much fun. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the show, please click on the link below. You can also contact me at my website if you have any questions about filmmaking or anything else. Off to the side, you'll see a couple of my books, Film Notes and the Film Notes Workbook. I encourage you to check those out if you'd like to learn more about filmmaking. See you in the next episode.
Scene 1, Apple, take 1.